official opposition. And we will be watching the clock on this.
Oh, yeah, the clock's back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I don't know how we even carry on QP today after all of this great talent that's been exposed, and it's certainly been interesting listening to this whole process. So I will carry on here. Now, I won't disappoint anybody with the theme, so we'll stay consistent as I have been since the beginning. A little shift talking about in terms of relation to the many times the answers from the Premier have been related to the report done in 2012. So the Premier has repeated two arguments for changing the early French immersion entry point back to grade 1. It was an election promise, and it was a recommendation of a 2012 report that we had done when we were in office. If the Premier is to have credibility on the second point, then he'll have no trouble sharing some information with us this morning, starting with the release of his strategic plan for French immersion. Can the Premier share the strategic plan either in print or electronically? Is that available? Yes or no? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I too want to take a second to thank the three members of the legislature for the very interesting and at times very funny poems and songs. So we do appreciate what they do every year to make sure that we leave the legislature in a very festive mood. The member from Kent South certainly won't have anything happen to his cabinet post, but he'll certainly make my future shuffles all that much easier. To clarify one thing that the Leader of the Opposition just said, Mr. Speaker, going to question period, it is important to note that when we say that we have based our decision, or what we have based our decision on to restore French immersion to grade 1, it really is the report, amongst many other New Brunswickers over several years who have made their arguments as to why that should be the case. When it comes to the electoral promise, I made that argument in the sense that's why the timing happened when it did, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So if the basis for the change to the early immersion is indeed more than the election promise, and based on the report 2012, would the Premier be able to stand and explain to the House, to the parents that are concerned about making these decisions at the very beginning of their child's school year, the details of the government's teachers' recruitment and the human resources plan to support this change to early immersion? Obviously, you know, one of the things we get very, very often from teachers or from parents, and we see it in the system where teachers are often put in places and not able to teach the courses that they were trained for. They move around through the system and they fill vacancies, but not necessarily their level of expertise in certain subjects. So is it possible to share the details of the recruitment plan, and are we actually able to connect the right teachers, the right training to the right subjects? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, just to clarify, when we say that we are basing this on the report, of course we're basing the decision on the report, but also including many other conversations and discussions, debates that have happened publicly within our province for several years. Also, Mr. Speaker, again, I just want to mention that when I say that we made the electoral promise, the reason that I bring that up is because at times the opposition has been making the case that this is a surprise move, and for me, if we have a report in 2012, and I should add we had been discussing this issue for years before, a report in 2012, we then made a promise in 2014, and then it's now being followed through with, Mr. Speaker. It was more to refute the idea that this is some shock or surprise. In terms of when it comes to resources, Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure the Leader of the Opposition can understand, we need to get a better sense of how many people are going to sign up for French immersion in grade 1, but we can assure you we're going to make sure we put the proper resources and investments in place to make this a success.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, as we roll out curriculum in any areas, the concern is, and we've talked a lot about this in terms of stability, and the need for that. Going back to the 2012 report, the Premier wants the parents in New Brunswick to believe him when he says the change to early immersion is based partly on the 2012 report and partly out of the election platform. Election platforms are often put together just that, for the election. And I've seen it. We've all done it in the case where after the election you say, well, how did I get myself there? And what are the facts that now support the promise that I made? And if the facts aren't there, you'd like to think we can all look and say there's something else could happen. If this is true, the Premier should be able to share with the House and the people in New Brunswick the complete review of the time and task at various grade levels and immersion high school graduation requirements. Is the Premier able to share any information that would help reflect the clarity in this area? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Premier.
Monsieur le Président, comme que nous avons dit et constaté à plusieurs reprises, nous avons basé notre décision sur un rapport qui avait été fait en 2012. Nous avons fait une promesse électorale et la raison que j'ai soulevé ça, on a fait une promesse électorale pour remettre et faire en sorte que l'immersion précoce en français soit dès la première année. Et la raison que je dis ça, c'est parce que je veux essayer de réfuter le point que ceci devrait être une surprise pour les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick ou pour l'opposition. Ça fait quand même des années qu'on parle de l'immersion précoce en français. Ça fait bien des années que nous, on a eu ici dans la province un rapport qui disait qu'on devrait avoir l'immersion précoce en français dès la première année. Et bien sûr, nous avons fait un engagement en 2014. Alors, je ne penserais pas que ça devrait être une surprise pour les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick. Lorsque ça vient aux ressources et les investissements que nous allons faire pour faire en sorte que ça soit un succès, c'est important de comprendre qui va enregistrer. Et c'est en raison de ça que nous avons bien hâte d'avoir les chiffres préliminaires qui vont nous aider à faire les investissements nécessaires pour que ça soit un succès ici dans la province.
Time. Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the issue's always been about how are we comparing what we know in the system so that we can build on past experiences and we can improve the system. We've all seen changes made that stop one program, even though it may be working well, in favor of another one, and so we get caught one more time in the classroom. We contend that the change to early immersion is driven solely by politics because it was in the Liberal platform. And yes, it was in the platform. We're not denying that. It was not in our platform because we had concerns about the timing and the results of this grade 3 coming through first and having a plan in place. I've been giving the Premier an opportunity to prove us wrong. The Premier has yet to support his claim that this change is partly for political reasons and also in response to a 2012 report. Is the Premier prepared to share the specific timeline and plan for curriculum review in immersion? If the Premier is able to share this, either in print or electronically, it might begin to help support his claim that the change is not purely due to politics. Can the Premier share this information? Yes or no? Thank you.
The Honourable the Premier.
Président, encore une fois, je ne comprends pas pourquoi le chef de l'opposition essaie de donner l'allusion que c'est une décision politique. C'est aucunement ça. C'est une décision qui a été prise basée sur un rapport qui a été sanctionné par son gouvernement lorsqu'il était le ministre des Finances. Deux personnes qui sont des anciens ministres de l'Éducation de deux différents gouvernements, un conservateur, un libéral, ont travaillé ensemble, ont été écouter les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick, ont consulté des centaines de Néo-Brunswickois et Néo-Brunswickoises et ils ont constaté et fait la recommandation très claire que nous devrons avoir l'immersion précoce en français dès la première année ici dans la province. Alors, je comprends que le chef de l'opposition aimerait dire aux gens que c'est une décision politique. Ce n'est pas le cas, Monsieur le Président. C'était basé sur ce rapport et sur bien des experts, des études et bien d'autres Néo-Brunswickoises et Néo-Brunswickois qui font l'argument que dès la première année, le plus tôt possible, en effet, le mieux que c'est pour que quelqu'un soit capable d'apprendre une deuxième langue, Monsieur le Président.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I think that the issue always comes down to is reports are written very selectively and also very, very focused on one particular topic. And in this case, it was, okay, when is it best to start French immersion? But in consideration of all the other issues in the classroom, the report does not address all of the other issues, all the other subjects, the math, the science, the areas that are also very, very much challenged. It doesn't address the streaming, the class composition. All these factors have to be part of a decision. And that's so many times a problem when we selectively pick a topic and say, okay, there we go, but all this other stuff is not considered. And that is the challenge. On the subject of training, would be a good time to ask if there is a training and professional development plan for immersion teachers now in place. And a delay would certainly provide more time for training with current teachers. The report recommends a training period. It recommends all of this be in place. Can the Premier share this plan with us at this time? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I understand the point of the Leader of the Opposition, but I think it's important to first note that it was his government, when he was the Minister of Finance, that sanctioned and commissioned this report. They're the ones that put the parameters in place for this report to be done. So if he has issues with the way that the report was done, I don't understand why he didn't raise them and make sure that the changes would be made when he was the Minister of Finance of the very government that commissioned this report. And Mr. Speaker, I think it's very clear that experts and teachers and students and New Brunswickers got to participate in this report. It was a very exhaustive and inclusive report. And I think it's very clear that the report, many experts, many literature says that French immersion in grade 1 is better because it's earlier, and earlier is better for somebody to be able to learn a second language, including the critic of education of the opposition, who very clearly said earlier is better. So that's why we're offering that to the children of our province, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the results don't prove that that as a success story. We haven't seen it over 40 years. We haven't seen success in our educational system. We've actually seen a tremendous streaming issue. We have 80% of our kids, roughly, that are not coming out fully bilingual, and I think that's such a shame. We have, of course, cases where our academics are at a bottom standard. That's just not acceptable. I was asked by the media if I would continue to ask the Premier about education in the new year. I replied, as long as I'm receiving notes like the one that I'm about to read. As a teacher, I can speak for the masses in saying that we have no voice. The teachers are never asked what could help to better our education. We're never approached about what we feel would work or not work. No one comes to see the needs in the classroom. We are not allowed to speak. It is as though we become a teacher, we must be an unknown vow of silence. Will the Premier agree to work with these teachers, give them a voice, and let their experience be shared?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, I'm not aware of who the individual is that wrote the member opposite. I certainly wish that that person that wrote to him would have had somebody go visit, would have had the chance to voice their concerns and ideas to government. We would love to have every single person do that, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, that's sometimes a challenge, but I can tell you we do everything we can to make sure we're listening to teachers, educators, that we're listening to students themselves, that we're listening to community leaders. Mr. Speaker, we consistently meet with leaders of our education system. Just this week, we've had ministers meet with leaders of the education system. I can tell you I have visited schools, numerous schools, since becoming Premier and before becoming Premier. I have visited classrooms. I have listened to people's concerns and ideas. Myself and the Minister of Education met over 100 teachers for a day, listening to what ideas and concerns that they had. So we're doing everything we possibly can to make sure that we have our ears to the ground to know how we can best deliver education in the province.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we're about to leave the legislature and return to our ridings, to our families and to our people. We are entering a season of celebration and reflection. It is my sincere wish that the Premier enjoys his season with family and celebration, and he will make time for reflection and wishes of the parents, the classroom teachers, retired teachers, and all citizens of New Brunswick who want the very best education system for our children. The sad part about all this debate is that we all want the same thing, and we just are finding difficult ways to get aligned on how we achieve it. I hope the Premier will announce that the change to early immersion will be put on hold at least until we get the results of the grade 3. At least until the teachers in the classroom can have their voice openly asked for in public. Say, we want your cooperation. We need your cooperation. We need your help. One of cooperation and determination to fix our education system. A system that is in desperate need of repair, but in desperate need of the voices of the classroom teachers. We want those passionate teachers back in the classroom teaching. We need them, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we will be restoring French immersion to grade 1 by September of 2017. And it's important to note, Mr. Speaker, to go to the heart of some of the arguments of the Leader of the Opposition, that it's not going to be done exactly the way it was done before. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that there are challenges, that there were challenges, and that there were things that we'd have to address in the way that it was done before. We get that, Mr. Speaker. We've listened to teachers on that. We know that. And we're going to do the best we can, Mr. Speaker, to mitigate those challenges and overcome those challenges. And we're going to do what we can to ensure we have the right resources in place to ensure that this will be a success and that overall we'll all get the outcomes of our education system that we want to have. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, Speaker, one of the ways in which we're going to do that is to listen to teachers, educators, and community leaders, but it's also by investing more in education. And I'm very proud to commit yet again today that we will be the government that invests the most in education in the history of our province.
Leader of the official opposition.
Mr. Speaker, in this time of the year and the festive season, one always look for areas of encouragement and cooperation, and I'm encouraged by the comments about it won't be done like it's always been done before. Because I think that is a foundational kind of argument that we continue to do things the way we've always done them and it just doesn't work. Or if it's not working, then we have a reason to change. So I'm encouraged to hear that. I'm encouraged to hear that we are actually going to talk with the teachers and really get their input into this. So a program that is implemented much, much differently than it has ever done before, that recognizes the challenges of the classroom, is a starting point to say, okay, it's going to be different. And it's a starting point for us to turn the corner in the new year to say, how can we realistically work together for the benefit of our students and our province. So I hope that is a sincere indication that we'll really look at that, let the teachers decide what works, what doesn't work, and let's not just focus on the language, let's focus on all the other courses as well, so we get better in every subject. And Mr. Speaker,
the Honourable Premier.
Monsieur le Président, j'apprécie les propos du chef de l'opposition, mais je veux juste faire le point que j'avais dit ceci à plusieurs reprises lors des dernières semaines, que nous n'allions pas faire exactement comme ce que c'était avant, mais le principe d'avoir l'immersion précoce en français dès la première année, c'en est un que nous allons s'assurer qu'on va avoir comme résultat. On va suivre le principe que le plus tôt possible de donner la chance à quelqu'un à apprendre une deuxième langue, le mieux que c'est pour qu'il soit capable ou elle soit capable d'apprendre une deuxième langue. Alors pour nous, Monsieur le Président, ça a toujours été le cas que nous allons, oui, avoir dès la première année l'immersion précoce en français, mais nous allons faire tout ce qu'on peut pour faire les investissements nécessaires pour mitiger les défis que nous avions vus dans le système auparavant lorsque ça venait à l'immersion. Alors ça a été toujours le cas, ça a été toujours le but de nos investissements et on va faire tout ce qu'on peut dans les mois à venir de faire sûr que ça va être un succès pour notre système d'éducation, Monsieur le Président.
Member for Riverview.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to follow up with the Minister of Finance on the issue of First Nation agreements that we talked about earlier in the week. If the Minister is aware, the current agreements totally encourage the on-reserve retailers to increase retail sales to reap the 95% tax rebates that are only available to them. For highly taxed products such as cigarettes and gasoline, this means the native retailers make more than 6 cents for a pack of smokes and 25 cents for a litre of gas in tax rebates. Logically, they use this advantage to price aggressively and gain more sales to gain more tax rebates. Really, if you look at it, they aren't in the retail business, they're really in the tax collecting business, and who could blame them, really? The Minister of Finance must realize that this tax collecting business is out of control, and does the Minister agree that it needs to be addressed?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question because it gives me the opportunity to say we are interested in working with our First Nations communities to indeed modernize and make improvements where we can. But where we differ is that indeed we value our relations with the First Nations community. We also value the purposes of various tax regimes. You know, they serve social, they serve economic, they serve purposes for competitiveness, for distributing assistance. And Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the approach that the previous government took, it is not the approach that we chose to take, because we choose to continue to collaborate with our First Nations communities and help them and work with them so that together we can build our economy in New Brunswick.
Member for Riverview.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the Minister needs to consider some of the consulting that they have not done, because protecting the revenue stream is something the Minister has said is important. But we see that over 85 service stations in New Brunswick have closed over the last 5 years, and the government knows that the major cause is the distorting effect of the First Nation agreements on retailer sales and margins. So will the Minister assure the independent retailers that the government actually supports what they are doing, and they'll no longer allow public policy to treat them unfairly and unequally.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as a government, we're always concerned about public policy being fair, and we will continue to do so. And I also want to make the point that businesses open and close or thrive and have some hard times for a variety of reasons. And when it comes to these tax sharing agreements, Mr. Speaker, we're in the process of reviewing these, and we're having success. We're having good relations. We've improved relations with our First Nations communities. And, Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to work collaboratively with them. A great deal of progress has been made from the discussions and collaborations. And, Mr. Speaker, I should say as well, I don't just meet with one or two stakeholders. I meet with a variety of stakeholders, and it's part of our role in government is to hear all perspectives, and we do that, and we consider all of this. Thank you.
Member for Riverview.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance is not getting it. This is a threat to the revenue stream that the Minister talked about protecting earlier in this session. 85 businesses have closed, Mr. Speaker, $50 million and growing tax loss to the coffers of the government. And the best way to fix this problem is to separate any tax reimbursement for the First Nations communities from being based on retail sales. Have a mechanism that does it in another way that doesn't promote competition and unfair competition with the independent retailers. So for certainty, for the provincial budget, fairness amongst the native band, and no distortion for the off-reserve retailers, the Minister must insist that the new agreements no longer be based on retail sales. So is the Minister going to turn a blind eye to the risk of the revenue stream, or fix it once and for all with no foot dragging?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Now I know where the foot dragging comes from. Mr. Speaker, we don't drag our feet. We're working really hard over here. We're getting things done. And, Mr. Speaker, I do continue with all of my colleagues to evaluate the needs and the challenges of all of the different pieces of our whole ecosystem and our economy. And we have to do that in order to make good decisions. But I will emphasize that we highly value our relations with First Nations communities, and our First Nations communities need to be part of our economic growth, and we're going to work together, and they are our partners, we are their partners, and Mr. Speaker, we highly value small business as well. Our economic success thus far is a lot because of the hard work of New Brunswickers in small business, and we'll continue this.
Oh, you do? No. You've had three. Yeah. I recognize the Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's been much discussion in the media over the past weeks about the water quality at Parley, Murray, Cap Brûlé, and Aboiteau beaches. The issue is not new, though, Mr. Speaker. There are studies going back to 1999 that have identified sources of the contamination. The only thing that's happened, though, since that time really is that the responsibility for monitoring the water quality was transferred from the Office of the Chief Medical Officer of Health to the Department of Tourism back in 2001. So my question is for the Premier, because it's in his bailiwick. Will he return the responsibility for water quality monitoring for the beaches in Shediac Bay back to the Office of the Chief Medical Officer of Health from Tourism?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Local Government.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais remercier le député d'en face pour sa question. La qualité de l'eau à la plage Parley et, à vrai dire, à toutes les plages du Nouveau-Brunswick est une préoccupation pour notre gouvernement. Effectivement, nous sommes très au courant de la question de tout ce qui se passe, de la préoccupation particulière avec, entre autres, la plage Parley. C'est pourquoi le gouvernement a mis sur pied entre le ministère de la Santé, entre le ministère du Tourisme, entre mon ministère, donc Environnement, gouvernements locaux, et également Agriculture, un comité qui va analyser toute la question, donc un groupe de travail qui va s'intéresser à trouver les causes du problème que l'on retrouve sur cette plage-là, entre autres. Et vous pouvez être certain que d'ici le printemps prochain, nous aurons un rapport et nous aurons des actions pour faire en sorte que ce joyau, entre autres, du tourisme dans la province, eh bien, que nous ayons les solutions afin d'aller de l'avant en cette matière.
Minister, Leader of the Third Party.
Mr. Speaker, it's good to see the minister is taking initiative on this issue, but the fact remains that water quality monitoring remains with the Department of Tourism. In the election platform, the Premier committed to ensuring the independence of the medical officers of health. Here we are halfway through the mandate, and it's still not been done. The fact that the beaches in Shediac Bay were not closed to swimmers despite high levels of fecal contamination last summer is a perfect example of why the chief medical officers must be independent. So the question is, when will the Premier table a bill to give the medical officers of health independence from government that he promised?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Local Government.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, encore une fois, merci au député d'en face pour sa question, mais je pense que je dois préciser que ce n'est pas parce que quelqu'un collige, prend l'eau comme échantillon, que c'est cette personne-là qui fait nécessairement l'analyse. Effectivement, vous devez comprendre que l'analyse, selon ma compréhension, se fait par le ministère de la Santé. Et donc, je pense qu'il ne faut quand même pas ici mélanger le fait qu'un organisme pouvait colliger l'échantillon, ce n'est pas eux qui font l'analyse. Cela étant dit, il faut savoir qu'à titre de participant au groupe de travail que nous avons formé, eh bien, les gens du ministère de la Santé vont se pencher sur le développement de nouveaux processus de surveillance de la qualité de l'eau sur les lieux récréatifs et on va étudier donc les différentes méthodes utilisées dans les autres juridictions du pays pour voir ce qui se fait pour améliorer la situation. Et c'est dans cette optique-là, Monsieur le Président, qu'on travaille afin de s'assurer que nos plages soient un bel endroit touristique pour notre province et sécuritaire évidemment. Merci beaucoup.
Leader of the Third Party.
Mr. Speaker, I guess in addition to wanting to have the problem cleaned up finally when government after government after government has failed to do so, the people of this province want to know one thing, and that is that next summer, if the acceptable limits are again exceeded at those beaches on Shediac Bay, can the Premier assure us that those beaches will be closed to swimmers when it's warranted?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Local Government.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, comme je l'ai expliqué tout à l'heure, nous avons un comité de travail qui va regarder aux sources de cette pollution-là pour trouver des solutions concrètes. Notre but, ce n'est pas de fermer la plage, notre but, c'est de trouver des solutions. Notre gouvernement est conscient qu'il y a un défi, il y a un problème depuis plusieurs années. Il y a plusieurs années, vers 1998, si ma mémoire est fidèle, il y a un groupe de travail qui a établi un processus pour indiquer quand il y avait un problème à la plage. On nous indique qu'il y a encore des problèmes sur cette plage-là, donc la solution n'a pas encore été trouvée. Notre gouvernement agit, on s'engage à agir, on a déjà mis sur pied un groupe de travail. Nous voulons trouver les sources de cette pollution-là afin de s'assurer que dès l'été prochain, les gens puissent utiliser ces différentes plages de la province, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup.
Member for Fredericton, York.
Mr. Speaker, Opportunities New Brunswick has not actually put many New Brunswickers on the job earning a paycheck. The Auditor General recently confirmed that ONB has been a failure in another aspect of their mandate, namely proving that they have implemented her ATCON recommendations. In March 2015, ONB head Stephen Lunn claimed that they would have these ATCON recommendations in place within 6 months. In October of 2015, the story changed with a new target date of March 2016. However, we learned recently that the Auditor General attempted to prove any of these recommendations were truly in place, and ONB did not seem particularly cooperative. Did the Auditor General's report concern the Minister responsible for Economic Development?
The Honourable Minister responsible for Economic Development.
Monsieur le Président, je suis très heureuse de pouvoir parler de ce que ONB a fait par rapport aux recommandations et la mise en œuvre des 19 recommandations formulées par la vérificatrice générale dans son rapport de mars 2015. Des 19 recommandations, toutes les recommandations ont été adressées et des procédures strictes et et très rigoureuses ont été mises en place pour l'octroi de crédits et la mise en œuvre de procédures très rigoureuses pour octroyer du financement aux entreprises du Nouveau-Brunswick. Et le ONB a traité toutes les recommandations. Il y a des recommandations qui avaient trait à l'octroi du financement et je pense que ONB a travaillé avec acharnement pour mettre en place toutes ces recommandations. ONB a également eu une excellente...
Member for Fredericton, York.
Mr. Speaker, let me read directly from Volume 3 of the Auditor General's report. Our follow-up procedure involves reviewing assertions made by our auditees for accuracy by examining new or improved initiatives implemented by ONB and by checking for supporting evidence to verify that the implementation has in fact occurred. So in this case, ONB indicated, and this is where the truth varies a little bit from what was stated, we have only just started to introduce the measures in this fiscal year. And the net impact of that is that the Auditor General will not be able to verify the claims by Mr. Lund until 2017. And we have an example from 2010 when Mr. Lund was then working in the province of Nova Scotia where he fell out of favour with the Auditor General in that province as well. So we have a proven track record of
the Minister responsible for economic development.
Monsieur le Président, je suis très heureuse de me lever encore une fois pour féliciter et saluer le travail qu'Opportunité Nouveau-Brunswick a fait par rapport aux recommandations de la vérificatrice générale. Les 19 recommandations ont été mises en place et nous avons un processus très rigoureux pour l'octroi d'aide financière aux entreprises du Nouveau-Brunswick. Et j'aimerais en profiter pour parler des résultats extraordinaires pour la création d'emplois au Nouveau-Brunswick lors de la dernière année. Durant la dernière année, on parle à l'intérieur des plus de 9 000 emplois ont été créés au cours de des dernières années et près de 3 000 de ces emplois-là ont été créés grâce au support d'Opportunité Nouveau-Brunswick auprès des entreprises du Nouveau-Brunswick. Et de ces 3 000 emplois-là, plus de 1 400 sont actuellement sont des emplois réels. Donc, ce ne sont pas seulement que des emplois commis, ce sont également des emplois réels pour les Nouveau-Brunswickois.
Time for oral questions has expired.